Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Frayne Olson describes the volatility in wheat markets. Jenny Rees explains why some growers are using sugar on corn and soybeans. Kurtis Harms reports on Japan's tea industry. And Kate Brooks analyzes recent USDA reports in the cattle industry. North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson is our market analyst this week. While Nebraska is behind its 5-year average in corn and soybean planting progress, the rest of the country as a whole is not. U.S. farmers have planted 92% of their corn and 61% of their soybeans. Nearly 3/4 of that corn crop is rated good to excellent, according to the USDA's latest crop progress report. We talked with Frayne Wednesday morning about corn and soybean markets, but started in wheat, where prices have recently seen drastic movement in both directions.
There's a combination of reasons. Just like anything, there's always a combination of events that lead to this. First, when we talk about the rally that we've seen the last couple of weeks, really caused by a series of both supply-demand conditions, some concerns about the flooding and the heavy rains that we saw in the Texas and Oklahoma area, the potential for some frost damage here in the northern plains, in particular in North Dakota, and then some dry areas now starting to appear not only in central and western Canada, but reappearing in the Black Sea region. And then add on top of that some of the financial issues where we saw retracement or fallback in the value of the U.S. dollar put quite a bit of strength and lift back into the wheat market. And then we hit the Memorial Day weekend, and guess what happened? All of those things started to turn on us. First, we had the value of the dollar start increasing again. Some economic news came out to suggest the U.S. economy is doing fairly well. And in the same sense, we did not get killing frost, or at least a heavy frost damage in the spring wheat area. Our wheat came through the weekend pretty well. It looks as the extended forecast as we get into central Canada, looks like in the 6 to 10 day forecast they might be getting some rain showers, which would again alleviate some pressure there. And then we're still waiting to see the exact extent of any kind of problems from the flooding and potential disease problems later on in our winter wheat belt, again, in particular in Texas and Oklahoma. My suspicion is we're going to be looking more for quality differentials or quality problems rather than necessarily any significant yield losses.
Can you further describe the impact or the strength of the dollar's impact on wheat and corn and soybeans?
Yeah, and that's a common question I get, is the value of the dollar and how does that impact the markets. And obviously as the value of the dollar increases, it makes our products that we're trying to sell into the international market more expensive. And of the major commodities, wheat is by far the most sensitive, simply because there's so much competition in the world market for wheat. We export a lot of our wheat. About 50% of our wheat goes overseas. So the wheat market tends to be very sensitive to changes. Next in line would be the corn market, again, because of the competition in the feed grain sector of the world market. Again, exchange rates can have an impact there. The soybean market is impacted by exchange rates, but not to the degree that corn and soybeans are, or the corn and wheat are, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. As bearish as you were the last time we talked, I assume the lows made in soybeans are no surprise to you?
Not really, and again, unfortunately, when we come back to the supply-demand conditions, it looks like we're going to have another big soybean year. At least that's the expectation in the market right now. So We came off of 2014 with record soybean harvest here in the U.S. We got record soybean production out of Brazil, near record soybean production out of Argentina, and we follow it with increased acreage here for soybeans in the U.S. So right now, as a buyer of soybeans, everybody's kind of sitting back and saying, good planting progress, looks like the weather forecasts are fine. You know, there is no reason to try and put any kind of spark back into the soybean market. We're slowly drifting lower. So even though we broke through the lows that we saw in September, from a technical standpoint, that's kind of psychologically important. But from a supply-demand conditions situation, that's not unusual. And unfortunately, I do expect things to drift lower as we get further into spring.
How do you use that information for 2015 sales?
Well, that makes it a bit challenging. Usually what happens is our next chance for any kind of a rally or any kind of really a weather scare is what we're looking for will come as we get later into the season. We get into mid-July and into August as we get into flowering and later on into pod set. If there ends up to be some drier pockets or some real heat that starts to build over the Midwest, of course that can change the psychology and the expectation for yields very, very quickly. So those would be some of the timing, from a timing standpoint, some of the objectives that I'd be looking for.
Among the three of these, corn has been the most tempered market really in terms of price movement. What are your thoughts on that market?
Well, again, on corn, I think we'll start drifting lower. The key in my mind will be whether we break that September low that we saw from before, from a charting standpoint. You know, there's some debate going on whether that'll happen or not. I do think we're going to be in a trading range again with corn until we start seeing what's happening in the crop development in July and into August. Kind of that same time period when we get into the pollination and cob fill later on. So I think if there is any sparks, it'll really come from some kind of a weather scare somewhere.
Anything to keep in mind before a couple big reports at the end of June on grain stocks and planted acres?
Well, just watch what the traders are talking about. Watch in particular about what the expectations are from some of the private analysts, because that usually sets the tone. And if there are any sparks coming out of those markets or those reports, it'll be because the USDA numbers are different from what the trade and the private analysts are suggesting.
As mentioned, the USDA reports on quarterly grain stocks and acreage are scheduled for release Tuesday, June 30th. The June crop report is slated for Wednesday, June 10th. Next week, Darren Newsom from DTN will analyze corn and soybean markets. The drought of 2012 left some lingering effects in its wake. The Maine, Nebraska farmer says some new weeds are popping up in the sandhills as a result of the hay purchase from across the country in 2012. Stressed by drought, pastures were opened up to invasive weeds like sulfur cinquefoil, baby's breath, spotted knapweed, and diffuse knapweed. You can read more about the introduction of these weeds and how to control them in the Maine, Nebraska Farmer. The latest USDA crop progress report shows Nebraska's farmers are 92% complete planting this year's corn crop and 59% finished in soybeans. As growers look to the next phase, Nebraska Extension educator Rees says there are some who have looked to boost production by using sugar. We talked with Jenny Tuesday near York to learn more about how sugar applications can impact a corn or soybean plant.
Well, farmers were looking at ways to increase their yields, and so they looked to other farmers to see what they're doing. And one of those farmers was Kip Kohlers, and he applies sugar with his corn and with his soybeans, and does this in a variety of ways in his program. And so farmers were looking at, will this add yield in my program too?
So how are they using it, and how are you studying it within the state?
Okay, so we have Nebraska On-Farm Research growers who've been doing this since 2010. So 2010 through 2014. We only have a handful that have been trying this in York, Clay, and Nuckolls counties. And basically what we've done is we use the same rates that Kip does because we haven't had any research to try any other rates. And so what we do is we apply 3 pounds of sugar per acre in 10 gallons of water. Sometimes this is applied with glyphosate, sometimes it isn't. And it's applied at V7 to 8 or 7 to 8 leaf corn, and also milo last year for the first time, and also R3 or beginning pod on soybeans.
What do the results show?
So the results from 2010 through 2014 show that in soybeans we consistently saw a yield increase, but it wasn't always statistically significant. In the corn and the milo, we a couple years did not see a yield increase, and the years that it was a yield increase, it wasn't always statistically significant.
Outside of yield, are there any noticeable benefits that you're seeing in the plants?
In the plants itself, what we noticed in the corn and also in the milo is some potential improved stalk rot or lodging. And so because of that, we actually had one grower who knows that a lot of farmers, they apply fungicides to their corn to increase stalk quality at harvest. We know that that works. And so one grower wanted to compare sugar application to the fungicide application in corn and see, were there any differences in stalk quality at harvest. So the research results from his fields, as well as small plots from Dr. Tamara Jackson-Zims, who did this at UNL South Central Ag Lab, all of those results show that there was no statistical difference in the stalk rot or lodging between the sugar-treated plots and the fungicide-treated plots.
Are there any benefits to insects that are also in the field?
There's several studies that have been done through the years showing that there's consistently, when applying sugar water, or basically a sugar water solution to crops, it increases beneficial insects in the field, and that's been proven time and again in the literature.
So is there a reason why this is happening?
We don't really, regarding the beneficial insects, the entomologists in the literature felt like they call it artificial honeydew in a way. So it's another sugar feeding substance. In analyzing gut contents of lady beetles and other beneficial insects, they found that lady beetles needed a sugar substance. Also, they find that in nectar and so forth as well.
What about the stalk quality and the yield?
The stalk quality, we don't really know what's going on there. We don't have enough research to demonstrate what's going on there. There's recent research showing that sugar can play a role in signaling pathways within the plant. And so there's been some recent research in rice showing that application of sugar before infection by a pathogen in rice would elicit a response in the rice to basically help the plant fight against the pathogen and prevent disease. So that's some really recent research, and we haven't obviously looked at any of those effects in Nebraska, but we are interested in having more growers try the sugar study because we, again, only have a handful of growers in 3 counties. So if any of your viewers are interested in trying this, we do have a protocol on our CropWatch website, and all of the results from these studies are on our CropWatch website at cropwatch.unl.edu.
On the CropWatch website, you can read Jenny's recent article on sugar use in corn and soybean production. As she noted, it includes more information about research results and other studies using sugar products. The Nebraska On-Farm Research Network is sponsored by the Nebraska Soybean Board, the Nebraska Corn Growers Association, and the Nebraska Corn Board. Nebraska Extension's Dave Boxler says late spring and early summer is the time for cattle producers to begin evaluating their fly control options. He says there are 3 types of flies that can make an economic impact in Nebraska's cattle: the horn fly, the face fly, and the stable fly. Dave says horn flies in the U.S. are estimated to cause more than $1 billion of losses each year. Face flies can feed on eye tissue and increase the risk of pink eye, and stable flies can significantly impact weight gains in Nebraska cattle.
The stable fly is one of our most impacting flies that we have now on pasture cattle. Historically, it's been found in feedlots and dairies for many years, but it has expanded its range into pastures, and its impact is significant. A study that was done in Nebraska a few years ago found that animals that were not protected against the stable fly lost 0.44 pounds per day compared to animals that were receiving a treatment. The economic threshold or injury level is just 5 flies per leg, and we can easily exceed that in Nebraska pastures during the summertime.
Dave says the bite from a stable fly is painful, causing animals to stomp their legs or stand in water to avoid being bitten. He says the only treatment is spraying cattle and cleaning up old feeding sites to reduce fly development. More information on each fly, as well as management options, can be found through a link on the Market Journal website. Over the past few weeks, we've explained why Japan is an important market for U.S. commodities, such as pork, beef, corn, and soybeans. This week, we look at agricultural production within Japan. Approximately 12% of total land area in Japan is used for farming. In previous episodes, we've shown you footage of rice production, which is one of the country's most important field crops. This week, Kurtis Harms reports on another important commodity for Japanese farmers.
In southern Japan, this is a common sight. Rows of tea plants neatly line the countryside. Tea grows well in this portion of the country, where the average temperature ranges from nearly 53 to 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and rainfall averages typically add up to nearly 60 to 80 inches per year. During our visit to Japan in April, we toured the Tea Industry Research Center, located in the Shizuoka Prefecture. This is the #1 tea-producing region in all of the country. Most of the tea leaves will be harvested and made into green teas, which are non-fermented and green in color. Nearly 86,000 metric tons of green teas are produced in Japan each year, and the Shizuoka Prefecture accounts for nearly 40% of this total. Tea plants are productive from March through November and are dormant through winter months. To prevent plants from frost during early spring or late fall, some plants are covered, while many in the region utilize the air stirring method. This method utilizes fans, which are 20 to 26 feet above the ground, and circulate or stir warm air to the tea fields. In addition to frost, certain varieties of high-grade tea plants are also covered or shaded for a period of time to enhance flavor. Tea leaves will typically be harvested 2 to 4 times throughout the growing season, and plants can live up to 35 years. Once leaves are harvested, they are soon processed in order to maintain quality and freshness. While green teas continue to be popular beverages in Japan, demand has shifted over recent years.
In general, the green tea consumption is diminishing gradually, and most recently, more people are drinking bottled tea in a PET bottle. It's increasing. However, the leaf tea consumption or the sales of leaf tea is diminishing.
In addition to the beverage, many green tea products have emerged in recent years, such as soaps, paper products, and cosmetics. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Kurtis Harms.
Thanks, Kurtis. To view more from our trip to Japan, you can visit marketjournal.unl.edu/Japan. We also have a look at cattle markets this week with Nebraska Extension livestock economist Kate Brooks. May's cattle on feed report from the USDA shows Nebraska as the nation's leader with 2.5 million cattle in feedlots of more than 1,000 head capacity. The state also led in commercial cattle slaughter for April, with the average live weight at more than 1,400 pounds, second only to Minnesota. In the grocery store, the price of all fresh retail beef fell in April for the first time since November. Last month's average cost of $6.05 a pound was down less than a cent from March's record. Kate joined us Wednesday afternoon to analyze cattle markets, starting with the latest cattle on feed report.
Cattle on feed numbers for May 1 came in about 1% above year-ago levels. The big surprise was placements. It was lower than expected. I think it was actually lower than trade expectations or the pre-report estimates, at about 5% below year-ago levels. The other thing to look at besides placements being lower is actual placements and the weight categories. If we look at 2 of the weight categories, those at 800 pounds and above, for the last 2 months, those have been above year-ago levels. And if we look at the placements of the lighter weight calves, those have actually been down compared to year-ago levels.
Why is that important? What does that mean?
You know, that's as we start to look at where we're going to have supply coming up, our marketings in the next several months, how tight supplies are going to get. We don't know exactly, the average weight of those 800-pound plus ones that are being placed, and so that can kind of cause as to how long it's going to be in the feedlot. But, as we're placing more in those higher categories, it could mean tighter supplies as we go forward.
So Nebraska placements were down 7% from April 2014. First of all, was that surprising? And second of all, what is that indicative of?
We're still down in supply numbers. Total inventory available to go into the feedlots is down. If we look at cattle on feed numbers for Nebraska, those have been, year over year above 2000, or every month year over year has been above 2014 levels. So we are increasing cattle on feed numbers, but we do start to see towards summer months, we start to see some declines in cattle on feed numbers as we go forward.
Do those placement numbers reflect at all on expansion?
I think as we look across the U.S. as a whole, we're starting to see some expansion. We've gotten some rain in some areas, not just in Nebraska, but in areas across the U.S. and some of the major, cattle numbers. We've seen heifer slaughter numbers down. We've seen cow slaughter numbers down. And so I think all of that is playing into seeing maybe further expansion of the herd.
April beef production down 6% from a year ago. Alarming at all?
Again, tight cattle numbers. If we're watching marketings, we were expecting cattle numbers, slaughter numbers to continue to go down. At least the first half, we were expecting maybe some increases the second, but that's still time will tell. The surprise would continue to increase those weights. And so, yeah, we have a decline in slaughter numbers, but increase in weights kind of somewhat offsets that.
Meaning that it's still paying to put more weight on the animal?
We still have some payments there to put that weight onto those animals, and so we may continue to see those increases there in weights.
So as I mentioned earlier on in the show, all fresh retail beef kind of leveled off last month. Does it show then that there's maybe hope for the consumer that prices are easing a bit?
Prices have started to ease. We won't know these latest data as far as, the Memorial Day weekend and how supplies went and what prices we were paying there, because we're ramping up for the big beef months. And so I think there we might have seen maybe some increases in beef prices. We probably won't see recent huge declines in beef prices going forward. We still have tight supply of beef.
With the avian influenza spreading across the U.S. and affecting millions and millions of birds, what effect does that have on competing meats here in the States?
If we look at the avian influenza, it's basically hitting the turkey industry, and then it has hit the egg-laying industry. That's important because it's affecting egg prices, so both the breaker eggs as well as the table eggs. When we talk about it for the broiler industry, it's not affecting those, so the chickens that we eat. The issue there is the export market. So we're producing more and more broiler chickens, inventories, supply is up. If we can't export some of that product, I think we export 17 to 19%. That's staying here. That can decrease those prices for the chicken products.
And become more competitive with beef and
pork. And again,
huh?
cause more competition there between beef and pork.
All right, tell me what your thoughts are on how prices have moved and what you think could go forward here in both feeder and the live markets.
We're still above 2014 levels. When we talk about the feeder calf, we're kind of doing some sideways cash trading. But still well above 2014 levels. As expected, I don't think we're going to see the rise we saw in 2014. So on average, we may be above 2014, but as we get into that second quarter, more calves tend to come to the market. We might actually not see those prices go up and see prices below 2014 levels.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension state climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast during this last week. Once again, we dealt with that good old four-letter word, rain, too much of it. And, of course, we've seen the heaviest totals coming out of the southwestern part of the state. And, of course, the panhandle with lesser totals coming out of north central and northeastern Nebraska. But everybody did receive precipitation during this last week. To kind of put this wet spell into context, particularly as you move south of Nebraska, there's many locations of south central Oklahoma up through north central Texas that over the last 30 days have received anywhere from 75% to 110% of their annual precipitation, which they would normally expect to receive. So if we wanted to translate that into precipitation totals here in Nebraska, Lincoln has pushed well above their all-time monthly record for May for precipitation, and it's only a little over 12 inches. In context, if we would have the same type of precipitation totals as southern portions of Oklahoma and Texas, we'd be looking at close to 25 inches of moisture. So as bad as we've had it, our friends to our south have really had a difficult time. Now, we do have this system that has been moving through the state over the last couple days, expected to exit out to the east of us, and then we're going to look into some fairly benign conditions for a few days before once again our attention turns to a rather aggressive trough working its way into the western United States that should arrive later next week and result in a good stretch of 3 to 5 days of, once again, heavy precipitation. So let's take a look at the upper models and see what we have in store. First thing I'll draw your attention to is the waning effects of that trough as it moves eastward or weakening. We have ridging and building behind this trough, so we'll see any precipitation departing eastern Nebraska during the first half of the day, and we'll return to cooler than normal conditions. Temperatures will be stuck into the mid 60s to the low 70s across the state. And with the drying trend expected to continue into tomorrow, we'll start to see some warming, particularly during the afternoon hours, and we should up our temperatures up about 5 to 7 degrees. We're looking at low 70s to upper 70s, warmest temperatures across the western part of the state. Doesn't look like any form of rain in the forecast. If we are going to see anything, it's going to clip extreme northeastern Nebraska. Time we get into Monday, we'll see that ridge firmly implanted over the central and southern plains with a trough approaching from the Pacific Northwest. So we will return to the 80-degree mark across a good portion of the state, more typical of what we would expect this time of the year. No precipitation is forecasted. As we get into Tuesday, we start to see the ridge pushing more toward the eastern United States, so some energy will move over top of the western periphery of this ridge, bringing precipitation or scattered precipitation to the Panhandle and portions of north-central Nebraska. Some of this may move into central Nebraska, but it doesn't look to be a very strong risk. As we go into Wednesday, of course, this trough picks up a little closer distance to the state, so we'd expect the precipitation chances to increase across the western half of the state, lighter across the east. As we go into Thursday, now we start to see energy pushing out of this trough, and we expect thunderstorms to start developing on a more frequent basis across the state beginning on Thursday, and we will continue that pattern into Fridays. Another piece of energy moves out, and more on the way as we go through the weekend. So the 8 to 14-day forecast, which takes in this action for this trough, indicates above normal temperature across the eastern United States, near normal conditions across western Nebraska. And then as we get into the precipitation forecast, you can see the stream of moisture moving to the southwest to the northeast in response to this trough. Very aggressive precipitation pattern taking place. So the best opportunity to get into the fields and plant will probably be from about Sunday through Wednesday before the precipitation begins in earnest and brings a halt to planting activities.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on commodity markets, sugar use in corn and soybean production, tea farming in Japan, and beef prices. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Next week, Darren Newsom will analyze corn and soybean markets, and Nebraska Department of Ag Director Greg Ibaugh will join us to talk about avian influenza in the state. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.